Law Matters? Of course it does. Welcome once again. I'm Debbie Morais, your host and moderator. This long-running program continues to provide legal information, relevant examples, anecdotes that will hopefully help you. As we say, the law matters. If you have a better understanding of the law, it makes you better prepared to protect yourself, your family, and your business. All along the way, we try to present various topics and help you so that you may decide to handle some issues yourself. If you do decide to enlist professional counsel, the idea is that you'll be better prepared, and so will the professional counsel you enlist. Our goal always is to save you time, money, and hopefully achieve the best possible results. And always, we want to welcome and again thank Attorney David Bazar from the Bazar & Associates law firm in East Providence, who continues to help us as we discuss the various topics. So today, the law profession, how it's evolving, law school, the bar, and perhaps a lowering of the bar in the future. What does that actually mean for you or to you? Everyone acknowledges that the process of becoming a lawyer is rigorous, it's costly, it's time-consuming. Clients often comment, maybe even complain about the cost of services. Some complain about the time it takes to litigate some things. Others say that they just don't have enough access to the legal profession. Well, things are evolving, and perhaps maybe for the good. There are some alternatives. For example, Yale now has a one-year MSL degree, which may be helpful to people. It's getting attention, it's getting some traction. It doesn't allow those who hold that degree to practice law, but it might provide some solutions. So let's get into it. But as we do, so the law profession, how does one get to be a lawyer in the traditional sense? How does that go?
You go to college.
Undergraduate.
Undergraduate. When you graduate from college, well, just before you graduate, if you want to do it in that track, linearly, you go to apply for law school and take the LSAT and get into law school, and then you go to law school, you graduate, and you take the bar exam.
So when we've talked about this before, people can take various routes before, as an undergraduate, before they decide to go to law school. It's not that they have to have a specific degree. Share your background.
So my background was, actually, if you want the long story, I went to college to be pre-med. I wanted to go to medical school. I loved biology. That was where my interest was. And so I went to college pre-med, so to speak. And in my freshman year, I took a physiology course where we cut the heads off of live rats, drain the blood into the sink, and
Yes.
I decided I don't like blood. Whether it's the rat's blood, my blood, or anybody else's, it's not for me, so medical school was not going to be in my future. So I was a sophomore in a French class, and I loved my French professor. So I went to her and I said, I'm really thinking of majoring in French. And she said, you're from Rhode Island, aren't you? I said, mais oui. And she said, with your accent, 6 years in Paris might not be enough. So I was a history major as a junior, decided to take History 101. So there I was with all the freshmen, and the chair of the department said, why would anyone want to major in history? So he told the story of a bright young history major from Trinity College in Hartford, where I went, who was working in his second year at a major company in New York City, and the owner and president of the company came out and said to him, come into my office. So we went into the office, and the president said to him, you're a bright young Trinity College graduate, you majored in history, I'm going to make you executive vice president and double your salary. And he said, well, thank you very much. And he looked at him, he said, you went to Trinity, you majored in history, and all you can do is say, thank you very much. He said, well, thank you very much, Dad. So I said, that's it, I'm a history major. So what are you going to do as a history major? Either you go to work for your father, you go to become a teacher, or you go to law school. My brother was in law school. He was not too far from Trinity and Bridgeport, so I would drive down, because back then we didn't have computers to type our papers. We had typewriters. So he had a friend who could type. She typed all my papers for me. We walked around the school one day, and he said, why don't you go to law school? When you get out, we'll practice. So we walked into the dean's office, and the dean said, go back, take the LSAT. If you get over a certain score, I'll take you. So I did. I went back to Trinity Monday. When do you give the LSAT? Or they have it on Saturday. You can walk in, sign in when you get there, bring your license. So I took the exam. I did okay. I went to law school. I got out. I said to my brother, let's practice law. He said, who wants to practice law? I'm working for Dad. He was always a few steps ahead of me.
So you had 4 years of undergraduate. How long for law school?
3 years.
And then you have the pleasure, as they refer to it, of sitting for the bar exam.
Yes.
That is how soon after grad school, after you finish, and how often do people sometimes need to take that before they pass it?
So you graduate from law school. I graduated in May, and shortly thereafter you start taking, at least I did, a bar review course. And so at that time in Rhode Island, there was a fellow who gave our bar review really predominantly about the Rhode Island exam, because they were separate. Every state has separate exams. We didn't have the multi-state exam that they have today. So there were some companies that were multi-state companies, because there is a portion of the exam that is sort of multi-state back then, but you couldn't use that to score to go to other states. So the exam was on a Tuesday. You sat for the Rhode Island portion of the exam. On Wednesday was sort of that multi-state portion that we did have. And then back in those days, you could then sit on Thursday for the Massachusetts exam. When they didn't want as many lawyers practicing both in Rhode Island and Mass, they put the Rhode Island and Mass on the same day, so you couldn't sit all at one time. So you took that review course, and at that time, there were certain bar examiners in Rhode Island, so he knew what they were thinking and doing in their practice. So he would try to predict what their questions might be and teach you the course to that. And then, of course, you reviewed the work for the multi-state and sat for the exam. So the exam was in June for me. They give it in June and February, I think. And then we got our results at the end of October.
And soon thereafter, you pass it, you're able to practice law.
You have to get sworn in, so there's another component to that. After you pass the exam, there's a fitness exam. There was also an ethics exam back in the day. I think they probably still have all of those as well. So the ethics exam you take, and you have to get it above a certain score, and then you have an interview with the committee that admits you to the bar in Rhode Island, and it's a fitness and character committee that looks at your background and everything to make sure that you passed the exam, you had scored what you needed to on your ethics exam, and that you, after your interview, meet the criteria for character and fitness.
To practice law, whether it is litigation or anything else, correct? So we have in the past, and we should probably quickly review, those who go to law school. Not everyone wants to go through and litigate, but they practice law in various other professions. So I'm in the public relations field. There are people who have law degrees and practice law. Some are lobbyists. What other things, other professions and placements are there for those who've had a law degree if they don't necessarily want to go head-to-head as litigators?
So there are a lot of people, or maybe not a lot, but a fair number of people who go to law school who actually never practice law in the traditional sense. Mm-hmm. But as I explained, my brother went to law school and worked running my father's business. My brother-in-law went to law school and worked running his family's business. So the law education is really a very valuable tool, not just to practice law, but it teaches you how to think and reason. It gives you a background in business and other areas of the real world. So they never practiced law in the traditional sense, but every day that they're transacting business, they're relying at some point or another on the law education that they received and the training that they received to be lawyers. And by the way, both of them took the bar exam and passed the bar, although they never practiced.
So you're actually moving along the lines of what I do want to talk about today. But as I've read about it, the bar ABA says that exam establishes what they call the minimum standard of quality for lawyers to practice and be considered competent. In other words, to protect those who need lawyers from those who might be incompetent. People need to have adequate fair, reasonable representation. Makes sense.
Yep.
It certainly does. And whether you took the bar exam or not, you still, as you say, have that body of knowledge. So currently, the industry seems to be undergoing some scrutiny because there are articles from Wall Street Journal to Economist and the rest that are saying that all that degree is about is what they call a credence good, something like akin to what forgive me for saying this, what an auto mechanic does, where the quality, even after the job is finished, is maybe difficult to assess in terms of finite actual metrics. So I don't know how you'd respond to that, but we do know that there are ways that you get evaluated apart from whether or not you passed that bar exam, which we already know you did. There are websites and ratings and whatever. What would you say? I mean, there has to be metrics apart from and beyond the bar exam that measure how competent and how good a lawyer is. What would you say to that?
So what I would say to that is a couple of things, and it depends on where you're looking at how somebody's rated or perceived. So there are some ratings that are given by peers, judges, lawyers, that type of thing. I kind of think that those ratings are somewhat more reliable and accurate in the sense that these are people who know what it takes to practice law and what an attorney is supposed to exhibit for ethical behavior and ability. It's harder for me to accept a lot of what people write on online reviews because people just either have bad cases and bad results and blame somebody else other than themselves in the position they put in and write things that are either untrue or aren't accurate. So I find it hard to accept a lot of things that people can write online. I've seen reviews of people online where they're not even reviewing the right law firm, whatever.
Fair enough.
So I take those with more of a grain of salt, just like I take those reviews for people who go to restaurants and either had a bad meal or whatever. I'll judge for myself.
Yep.
But overall, you're, as an attorney, required to have mandatory continuing legal education. You have to keep yourself updated and abreast of what changes are being made in the law. There's a requirement, I think, not from the practice of the law, but for your own practice, if you're practicing law, to maintain good relationships with your clients and inform them as to what's going on and doing a good job for the clients, because if you don't do that, you're not going to get referrals. And most attorneys' highest source of referrals are from existing clients.
Certainly. So we're here to share information with people. There had been AVO, which was then absorbed by another group, but I understand that, Martindale-Hubbell was considered at one time to be a gold standard. Are those now considered to be on an equal par with Yelp, the Yelp of reviewing lawyers, or how does that work?
So Martindale-Hubbell does its ratings through a peer system of ratings, which is usually with attorneys and judges rating other attorneys. I think that's a higher standard and more reliable than Yelp or even AVO, which is also done by the public's perception. And my problem with that is there are going to be people who like the result in their case and give a really high rating, and people who didn't like the result in their case, and it may not have been the attorney's fault, but are going to give a really low rating.
I think that's fair, and it's good for you to point that out because it does seem reasonable, just as if someone had a bad experience at some other place and just happened to post that rather than all that has gone before or will go follow it. So earlier I was mentioning that many are concerned because, never mind the cost of retaining a lawyer, but for some who are low income or just for whatever reason don't have access to lawyers, it's really some shocking information here. So 90% of the civil problems reported by low-income Americans received inadequate or no legal help, according to a Justice Gap report. And even if that wasn't bad enough, COVID, I'm sure, made that even worse. You've pointed out as a former president of the Rhode Island Bar Association, that many of your lawyers do volunteer to help. I guess they're required to put in some volunteer time, but they do. And yet there still is this kind of gap. Do you still see that? Do you see it more since COVID?
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, people in the Rhode Island Bar, lawyers that practice in the Rhode Island Bar, volunteer, and a large percentage of lawyers do that. Even large firms have mandatory volunteer lawyer projects and programs. It's not mandatory. It's not required by the Supreme Court, and you do not have to do it, but people do it because they know it's the right thing to do. The Rhode Island Bar Association has the volunteer lawyer program, which is where you would go if you can't find a pro bono lawyer, so to speak. And I think there's a high demand still. I think the demand is never going to be fully met, but it's being met at a really high rate through the Bar Association. And I also think that we've done some unbundling of legal services, which means that if you need an attorney for one part of your case, but you can handle the rest yourself, attorneys are now able to do either a limited appearance in court. So, for example, if you're doing a divorce and you're going to handle most of it yourself, but you need help with one aspect or another, a lawyer can enter just for that one particular aspect and be allowed to withdraw without having an obligation, which you would otherwise have, of continuing to have representation by that attorney in that case. A judge can't require the attorney to stay in if you're only hired for a small piece of the litigation on a limited scope representation. So that's helped to some degree get people some guidance or help with their case without having to pay for the full case, so to speak.
And while you speak for or speak to the Rhode Island Bar Association and people who are in that state, is it fair enough to say that all states have some degree of volunteer lawyers who will help with primarily civil cases? Is it also criminal cases?
So
both?
Two different things. Mm-hmm. On civil cases where there is no constitutional right to have an attorney, there is a need for a volunteer lawyer. Massachusetts has programs. In Massachusetts, it's my understanding, they have attorneys who volunteer for lawyer for the day in a court, and they'll sit in the courthouse and help people answer questions about forms or procedures and that type of thing. And there are always, every state has different programs to match up attorneys who are willing to take some cases on a pro bono basis to people who have that need.
Good. So I think that that's a good place to springboard to my earlier comment about Yale having a one-year MSL. Now you're a JD, right?
Yeah.
An MSL that is very concentrated. It certainly, obviously, as 1 year isn't what you went through. Doesn't require bar exams. Also doesn't entitle that person to go to practice law in a court as you are able to. But based on what we've discussed up to this point, does it make sense to you that there is certainly a good place for that to either help a law firm at times or even just help someone in the general public who needs a contract reviewed? In other words, do we need JD, with all due respect, do we need someone who's passed the bar exam, who's done all of that study to review a contract, for example? Is that a little bit overkill? Maybe not, but does it seem at least that there's a place for that in the current landscape as it is?
So as I understand what you're saying, they have a master's of law rather than a doctorate or a JD in law.
Yes.
So the place where I can see that having some value is big firms in New York City, for example, have people that they hire to review contracts. Those people are just reviewing the contracts for content. Having a master's in the law would be a really good place to put that to use. But it's the lawyer who gives the advice on the contract. If you're not a lawyer, you can't give legal advice. It would be helpful to have someone who has a master in law do certain things. For example, Rhode Island allows non-lawyers to do some functions with a real estate closing. I think it would be great if those people had a master's in the law so they had some training and competency in what it is they're doing. What they're not allowed to do is at the closing give the people to the transaction legal advice. So a lawyer has to do that. So that's the difference between being a lawyer and having a master's in the law, is you can review things, you can make sure that they're correct, but you can't give somebody legal advice. That's where you're required to have passed the bar.
So I guess that's the very point that some of these articles were making, that it seemed reasonable that if someone is reviewing a contract, they may not be so astute, but they could have someone short of your pay grade who could review it just to see if there's something that seems very out of line without retaining the services of one who is of your caliber. Could they not, you're saying they could not and should not weigh in and consult or offer some advice? It seems that they very easily could flag something as you probably want to review that, or maybe even if they find something, shuttle it up to you, but not necessarily be taken out of the picture. It seems like there might be a place for them.
Right, there is, but you have to be very careful, because I think the practice of law is defined as obviously someone who goes to court and represents somebody, but also someone who is giving advice on the law and what you should do to protect yourself, or to, in some cases, negotiate and complete a contract. To have someone review it and say, yeah, you know what, there's an issue here, you need to then go see a lawyer, or I work for a lawyer, let's have the lawyer review this at this point, that's okay. The paperwork that's signed in a transaction, a closing transaction, to have them review it and make sure it's in place and you sign here, it's okay, as long as it doesn't require you to give legal advice. The Bar Association in Rhode Island had this case, and it was decided by the Supreme Court as to what somebody could or could not do at a closing, what documents they're allowed to either draft or not draft. Does a lawyer have to draft them? That's all decided in this opinion. And so it's a careful opinion as to what is practicing law and what is that somebody who doesn't have a law degree is allowed to do within, I'll say, the scope of a legal transaction.
So trying to think about where some of these would fit in. We were just talking about contracts. I know in the past we've had segments about some of those phone bills that are one page of your cost and about 12 in 2-point type. You're lucky to read with a magnifying glass, of things that could catch you up and give you some trouble, where you can't, you have no recourse, and the rest of this, arbitration and the rest. So it seems like something like that would be a very reasonable fit for someone who has an MSL to say, this is really not a good thing for you, or yes, we need to go see a lawyer and start a class action suit or something, for example. Where else could you see, could that even fit in a law firm where someone else who's not a paralegal, I guess that's below a paralegal. No, is that above or above?
Somewhere between.
That's somewhere in between. So would there likely be a fit for that, for other than just the largest of law firms, to maybe provide more people access to services that are not criminal law and they're going to go to jail for the rest of their mortal life?
So to go back to your other question about criminal law and volunteer lawyers, what you have in criminal law is if you're facing incarceration or that type of thing, you always hear you're entitled to an attorney. If you can't afford one, one will be appointed for you. So that's where that comes in. It's the public defender's office in most states.
So even though the public defender's office, there are an awful lot of cases, and we understand that there's only so much time and energy and resources spent on that, I wonder if that isn't a place where they have others who can help fill in and...
Well, they do. Court-appointed attorneys, and there's a list of attorneys who are approved by the court, so that if the public defender has a conflict or can't, for one reason or another, represent someone, then they go to their list of attorneys who are willing to be court-appointed and paid for by the court.
Sounds right. And while we're focusing mostly on the court, there are areas such as intellectual property, corporate compliance, and maybe some of those with an MSL versus the JD might find some places where they can fit in. So you have the JD. MSL is something that is gaining some traction. And there's one other that is even a higher degree of specialty if you wanted to specialize. Can you elaborate on that? What is that one called? Not LLM?
LLM is a little different. Okay.
Different. What are the letters? Master of Laws.
Yeah.
MSL is.
Master of Law. LLM is a degree that's actually sometimes in conjunction with the JD. It's another form of a law degree.
But not if you don't want to practice law, right?
No, you can practice, but here's the deal. Usually it's like a master's in taxation or something above and beyond the JD or whatever degree you graduated from law school with. And then an LLM is an additional degree as a specialty in taxation. But as an attorney in Rhode Island, you're not sanctioned as a specialist. But if you have that degree, then you can say, I have additional training in taxation, for example.
So there are some distinctions there that people need to be
But
aware.
I wasn't ignoring your other question when I went back to criminal law. Your question was, what's the place for someone with that degree? It could be in the form of, certainly, there are some paralegals who don't have that degree, but they have that on-the-job training that sort of gives them that same type of knowledge. So if you had that degree and you were in the law firm, you can do a lot of different things and be charged at a lower hourly rate working under the supervision of an attorney who might have to review or advise the person who's doing the work. Yes, you did that right. No, you should go back and redo this, which is what attorneys do with paralegals all the time. So there is a role in many law firms for someone who has that training.
It seems that there is interest in this other MSL situation. So when you were in school, obviously you were younger, you were there full time. If someone is thinking about going to law school, this 1 year seems like it might be a very attractive and doable option. It does require full time. I don't even know if they can do it online. I don't think that happens, but it seems that there is a growing need for legal services. Do you find right now that you've had more people calling the Bar Association in need of, if not going to court, at least having things done, whether it was contractually or whatever? Do you find that?
Well, my practice is busy, and I'm not necessarily attributing it to COVID, but it's really busy. And so if I needed another paralegal and someone applied and had that degree, I think that might be a leg up coming in and saying, oh, so you have some training, so you know a little bit about the law already. That's helpful. And it might be competitive with someone who has 20 years on the job training. So it might actually, 20 years on the job might be more attractive. But it's the idea of what knowledge base you already have and what experience you already have. So if you're young and you don't have any experience and that's all you want to do is the 1 year of training, I think it's helpful to get yourself a leg up, so to speak, on other people applying for what I would say is a job, maybe as a paralegal job or somewhere between paralegal and being an attorney, if you want to call it that.
Good to know. Good information. We hope that this has been helpful to you in your need for legal services as you go forward. We thank you for tuning in to Law Matters. As we say, stay tuned. The law matters to you.